November 1980, Boca Raton, Florida. A 25-year-old dropout walks into a sanitized conference room to meet the most powerful men in the world. Across the table sit the executives of IBM. At this specific moment in history, IBM is not just a company, it is a sovereign state of computing. They control the hardware, the supply chains, and the global flow of business data. They have summoned this boy because they are in a panic. They need an operating system for their new personal computer, and they need it yesterday. Here is the paradox that defies every conventional rule of business. The boy sitting across from them does not have an operating system. He hasn't written a single line of code for one. He doesn't have a prototype. He doesn't even have a team working on it. In terms of tangible assets, he is bankrupt. Yet 45 minutes later, Bill Gates walks out of that room having secured the most lucrative contract in the history of capitalism. Most biographies will tell you that Bill Gates became the richest man on earth because he was a visionary coder who worked harder than everyone else. That is a lie. That is a comfortable myth designed to make the working class feel better about the correlation between effort and reward. The truth is much colder and far more instructive. The deal that birthed the Microsoft empire wasn't a feat of software engineering. It was a masterclass in financial arbitrage. Gates was about to execute a short squeeze on the entire computing industry. He was about to sell a license for an asset he didn't own to a buyer who didn't understand that they were handing him the keys to the kingdom. He didn't win because he built the best car. He won because he tricked the giants into letting him own the road. How do you sell a product that doesn't exist to a company that has infinite resources? The answer isn't in the code. It is hidden in the fine print. To understand the mechanics of this heist, you first have to understand the desperation of the victim. In 1980, IBM was the big blue monolith. They were an institution built on vertical integration. They owned the mines that produced the silicon. They owned the factories that stamped the metal. And they owned the sales force that wore the suits. Their business model was total control, but they were suffering from a terminal case of institutional inertia. While IBM moved in 5-year planning cycles, a quick garage startup named Apple was moving in 6-month sprints. The Apple II was bleeding IBM's market share, and for the first time in history, the giant was scared. In a panic, IBM leadership authorized Project Chess. The mandate was impossible. Build a personal computer to crush Apple and do it in 12 months. To hit this deadline, IBM made a strategic decision that would doom them. They broke their own cardinal rule, outsourcing. They decided to build the PC using off-the-shelf components from third-party vendors. They bought the processor from Intel. They bought the printer from Epson. They commoditized their own hardware before the product even launched. This was the first crack in the dam. They still needed the soul of the machine. They needed an operating system. Logic dictated they go to the market leader. In 1980, that was Gary Kildall of Digital Research, the creator of CP/M. By all metrics, Kildall should be the trillionaire we are studying today. IBM executives flew to California to hand him the deal, but Kildall was an engineer, not a deal maker. He refused to sign IBM's draconian NDA. He got bogged down in the legalese, trying to protect his intellectual property. He thought he was being prudent. In reality, he was rejecting the single greatest distribution channel in history. The negotiations collapsed. IBM was left with a deadline, a pile of hardware, and no brain to run it. A vacuum had been created in the supply chain. This is where Gates enters the equation. He wasn't the first choice, he was the fallback. When IBM turned to him, Gates didn't look at the situation like a programmer. A programmer would say, "I can't take this deal. I don't have an operating system." Gates looked at it like a hedge fund manager finding a mispriced asset. He saw a massive corporation with a short position on time. They didn't care about the quality of the software. They cared about the date on the calendar.
Gates realized that the value wasn't in the code itself. The value was in solving IBM's panic. The vacuum was open, and he stepped in to fill it, armed with absolutely nothing but the audacity to say yes. Having secured the interest of the whale, Gates now had to source the bait. He needed an operating system, and he needed it fast enough to keep IBM from looking elsewhere. He didn't have years to develop one. He had weeks. This is where the operation shifts from a technology story to a classic financial arbitrage play. In finance, arbitrage is the simultaneous purchase and sale of an asset to profit from an imbalance in price. It exploits the difference between what a seller thinks an item is worth and what a buyer is willing to pay. Gates knew what IBM was willing to pay, which was effectively infinite given the stakes of Project Chess. Now he just needed to find a seller who undervalued their own asset. He found that seller in a small nondescript outfit called Seattle Computer Products. Working there was a programmer named Tim Patterson. Patterson had written a functional, albeit rough, operating system called QDOS. The acronym literally stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. It wasn't a masterpiece. It was a clone of Gary Kildall's CPM. It was a utility tool, sitting on a shelf gathering dust. Gates and his co-founder, Paul Allen, approached Seattle Computer Products with the casual demeanor of someone browsing a flea market. This was the critical strategic maneuver. If Gates had walked in wearing a suit and announced he was representing IBM, the price of QDOS would have skyrocketed to $10 million overnight. Instead, Gates maintained strict information asymmetry. He suppressed the most vital piece of data in the market, the existence of the IBM contract. He acted as if he was buying the software for some minor, unspecified projects. He negotiated ruthlessly, downplaying the utility of the code while secretly knowing it was the missing key to the entire computing industry. The deal was struck. Microsoft paid $25,000 for a non-exclusive license, and shortly after, a total of $50,000 for the full rights. $50,000. For the price of a luxury car, Gates acquired the foundational layer of the global digital economy. He took Patterson's work, scrubbed the name QDOS, and rebranded it as MS-DOS. He didn't write the code, he acquired the equity. He successfully arbitraged the ignorance of Tim Patterson against the desperation of IBM. He bought the asset for pennies in the local market and was preparing to sell it for billions in the global market. The product remained exactly the same, only the owner had changed.
This brings us to the negotiation table in Boca Raton, the site of the most catastrophic oversight in corporate history. IBM sat at the head of the table. They were accustomed to dictating terms. Their mental model of business was rooted in the industrial age. You build a machine, you sell the machine, you book the profit. To them, software was nothing more than a component, like a power cord or a plastic casing. It was a necessary expense to make the iron, the hardware, functional. Their initial offer reflected this mindset. They wanted to buy MS-DOS outright. They wanted to pay a flat fee, take the code, own the copyright, and never speak to Bill Gates again. If Gates had accepted a flat fee buyout, Microsoft would likely be a footnote in history, a defunct vendor that did contract work for Big Blue. But Gates understood the concept of unit economics better than the seasoned executives across the table. He knew that the real money wasn't in the lump sum, it was in the royalty. He refused to sell the code. Instead, he proposed a licensing agreement. He offered IBM the deal that seemed too good to refuse. He would give them the software for a staggeringly low price per unit, practically giving it away, allowing IBM to keep the lion's share of the profit margin on every PC sold. The IBM executives were delighted. They thought they were fleecing the kid. But buried in the legalese was the poison pill that would kill IBM's dominance. Gates insisted that Microsoft retain ownership of the software and, crucially, that the license be non-exclusive. This was the clause, the
the loophole. IBM's lawyers skimmed right past it because of arrogance. In 1980, IBM believed they were the market. The idea that another company could successfully build a personal computer was laughable to them. They reasoned, who cares if Gates can sell this OS to other people? There are no other people. They were blinded by their own monopoly. They didn't see that Gates had just successfully decoupled the software from the hardware. By retaining the rights to license MS-DOS to third parties, Gates wasn't just signing a vendor contract. He was positioning himself as the central utility provider for an industry that hadn't even been built yet. He let IBM build the car, while he quietly secured the exclusive rights to sell the gasoline. August 1981. The IBM personal computer launches. It is a massive commercial success, instantly becoming the industry standard. For a brief moment, the executives in the blue suits pop the champagne. They believe they have secured their dominance for another generation. But in reality, they had just initiated their own obsolescence. The fatal flaw of Project Chess was the decision to use open architecture. Because IBM used off-the-shelf components to meet their deadline, they unknowingly showed the rest of the world exactly how to build a PC. A startup in Texas called Compaq realized that if they bought the same chips from Intel and the same drives from Tandon, they could build a computer that was 100% compatible with IBM's software, but sell it for 20% less. The only thing stopping Compaq and the legions of clone manufacturers like Dell and Gateway that followed was the operating system. They had the body, but they needed the brain. This is where the non-exclusive clause detonated. When Compaq built their clone, they didn't have to write their own OS. They didn't have to negotiate with a hostile IBM. They simply called Bill Gates. Because Gates owned the license, he was legally free to sell MS-DOS to every single competitor that wanted to destroy IBM. And he did. He sold it to Compaq. He sold it to HP. He sold it to everyone. Suddenly, IBM found themselves in a hellish landscape of their own making. They were trapped in a brutal price war with the clones. Hardware is a commodity business. It fights on thin margins. If Dell drops by $50, IBM has to match it. Their profit margins were pulverized. Meanwhile, Microsoft was operating in a different economic reality. Software has zero marginal cost of reproduction. Whether Gates sold 1 copy or 1 million copies, his cost was the same. While the hardware manufacturers slashed each other's throats to sell the box, Microsoft collected a tax on every single box sold, regardless of who made it. IBM had done all the heavy lifting. They legitimized the market, educated the consumer, and built the supply chain. Yet by the mid-1980s, the IBM-compatible PC market was exploding, but IBM's share of it was shrinking. The value had migrated from the tangible machine to the intangible code. Gates had turned the hardware manufacturers into commoditized serfs, working tirelessly to expand the borders of the Microsoft empire. He had effectively outsourced his sales force to the entire global electronics industry. The history books laud Bill Gates as a technologist, a philanthropist, and a genius. But if you strip away the PR and look strictly at the balance sheet, you see him for what he really was in that moment. The ultimate rent seeker. The capital logic here is devastatingly simple. Wealth is not generated by the complexity of your labor. It is generated by the leverage of your position. Gary Kildall was the better engineer. IBM was the better manufacturer. But Bill Gates was the only one who understood the architecture of value. He realized that in a digital ecosystem, the hardware is just the vessel. The operating system is the water, and you can't survive without water. By purchasing QDOS for $50,000 and licensing it to the world, Gates executed the highest ROI trade of the 20th century. He didn't just sell a product, he installed a toll booth on the information highway before anyone even knew the road was being paved. Every email sent, every spreadsheet calculated, and every game played paid a fraction of a cent back to Redmond. He taught us that ownership is superior to creation. You don't need to dig the gold, you just need to own the only shop selling shovels, or better yet, own the land the gold is buried on. This is the difference between linear income and geometric wealth. Linear income is IBM selling one computer and making one profit. Geometric wealth is Microsoft writing one piece of code and getting paid forever. Don't settle for being the player. Design the game so that you win no matter who is playing. This channel exists to dismantle the myths they teach you in business school and replace them with the mechanics that actually move money. We don't care about the hustle, we care about the deal. If you want to understand the invisible contracts that run the world, and if you are ready to stop working for money and start engineering leverage, you are in the right place. Hit the like button to signal to the algorithm that you prefer analysis over hype. Comment below, what is the non-exclusive clause in your industry that everyone is missing? Subscribe to the channel. We are just getting started. Welcome to Capital Logic.